What happens when one man tries to watch all the horror films of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project. We're now fully in the swing of 1983, and I have to say that the year was off to a really strong start. So let's see if we can keep that momentum going, okay? Let me look at the roster here for this episode. Okay. Uh, okay. I don't know what that one is. And okay, those are good. Okay. Well, it's looking like a mixed bag ahead of us. So let's dive in and see how stylish we can get. We're starting this block off on March 4th, still pretty early on in the year, and let's check out a little number called Olivia. It begins with someone peeping in on a couple in bed, and it's a little girl requesting a bedtime story, and her mommy is a working girl. And one night she has a rough customer that kills her while she watches. He disposes of her body, and little Olivia shuts down and can't tell the police anything. 15 years pass, and she's now grown up and played by Susanna Love, who we've already seen in 1980 with The Boogeyman and in 1982 with Brainwaves. And she's doing a British accent here, and it's, not great.
I'm getting tired of being in the house all day.
And she's haunted by the guilt from her mother's voice. One night, she dolls up and heads onto the street and picks up a man and reenacts the circumstances of her mother's death, but instead kills the John. There's also an American engineer here, and he's helping them do a restoration on the London Bridge, and he becomes infatuated with Olivia and stalks her with a camera. They start a pretty steamy relationship, much to the chagrin of Olivia's boyfriend, but he soon takes a trip over the bridge as Olivia takes off. We have another 4-year time jump, and we're back in the US, and the parts of the London Bridge are now in Arizona. And Michael is here too, as is Jenny, who looks a lot like Olivia but doesn't have that accent. But she seems to not recognize him. But is this his lost love? What's the deal with Olivia? And the presence of Susanna Love should tip you off that, like the other two entries she's had here, this one is directed by Uli Lommel, her husband at the time. He had already earned himself a reputation as being a low-budget schlock master, and usually had Love as the lead in his films. They actually cooked up this film while trying to develop a sequel to The Boogeyman, and ended up at that actual bridge in Arizona that's made up of the parts of the London Bridge, and thought that it was an interesting enough of a thing to wrap a script around. It was done in a super low budget and actually ran out of money partway through filming, so a large number of scenes had to be shot later, after production had formally wrapped, as more money would come in. It wasn't very successful at the time, and was released under multiple titles, and was filmed under the name Faces of Fear, and in the UK was released as Prosy, slang for prostitute. It was also called Double Jeopardy over there, and was put out as Mad Night in France, Double Menace in Canada, and some releases in the US called it A Taste of Sin. And under any title, it's pretty decent. I'll give it a 3. It's actually more serious and more well done than most of Lommel's stuff. I think Boogeyman is more entertaining, but this feels more polished, even if the story is kind of incoherent and just jumps from place to place. Its significance is just a 1, since it's very obscure, even in terms of Lommel's filmography, and didn't make any sort of impact at the time. Should you watch it? I'd say yes. It's not a great film, but it's got some good stuff going on that make it worth your time.
What's your name?
Eric?
Well, Eric, how would you like it?
This next one debuted on the small screen and first aired on March 6th, and it's a pretty unheard of one called The Demon Murder Case. It has a warning screen at the intro to tell us that we're gonna see scenes of demonic possession, but we should feel okay because they're not real, and I'm frightened that they need to actually say that. Clark is here, so watch out for the dogs, and he's talking about demons taking someone over. And then there's journalist Frau Blucher, and they're covering the trial of a hollow man. I'm not sure why this case is complicated because Matlock is on hand, and everyone is talking about how this case is going to change everything. It involves demons and murder. It then flashes back a year and we see a younger Kenny and a young boy saying that he's seen some evil stuff. His family's not sure if he's making it all up, but things start to ramp up as he starts speaking in voices and creating wind. People start to think that the devil is actually involved. A priest says that what's going on is purely medical, although others aren't so sure. There's all the standard tropes like throwing holy water, and Kenny invites the beast to take him instead, and they do an exorcism with a guy that knows more about raising pigs than raising hell. That leads to stuff that we've seen 100 times, like floating above the bed, and eventually he attacks Kevin, and it looks like the possession has now spread to him. He starts to show the signs and eventually ends up in a family dispute where he kills a man, and their legal defense becomes the devil made him do it. And if this sounds familiar to you, then you've suffered through The Conjuring 3, since that film and this one are based on a real-life court case from 1981 that these events are somewhat loosely based on. This version was handled by William Hale, who did a lot of TV and TV movies, but not a whole lot in the horror realm outside of a couple of episodes of Night Gallery. And yeah, this is supposed to be based on the true stuff, and Andy Griffith and Beverly McKinsey are fictionalized versions of the Warrens here, and in real life this case ended up with Artie Johnson, the real counterpart of Kevin Bacon's character, being found guilty and his whole demon possession defense deemed completely unprovable. He was sentenced to 10 to 20 years, although he only served 5 of them. And I'm not into this. It's a 1.5 from me. We've seen all the possession stuff done better, and I'm not a fan of trying to present it like some great legal travesty happened here, when a guy killed someone and then blamed it on the devil, and the movie treats it like that's like some sort of valid defense. Its significance is just a 1.5 since it's the least known version of this story and didn't get much acclaim, but does have a big list of recognizable faces involved. Should you watch it? Nope, case dismissed.
In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you!
Here for him! And here for you!
Here's another TV movie, and this one aired just a few days later on March 7th, and it's Deadly Lessons. It starts off with one of the Montelli kids, not in Amityville this time, and she's starting at a new boarding school. And Stephanie number 5 Alive is here, and so is Renee Jones. And holy crap, she was on Days of Our Lives. And when I say she was on it, I mean she started 1,752 episodes, which is 5 shows a week for 7 years. Chet is here too, so you're stewed, buttwads. And this guy is David Aykroyd, who is not related to Dan, and the headmaster is none other than Donna Reed. So this is a pretty solid cast list so far.
He has an incredible mouth.
Like, how does one judge a mouth? Like, what makes a mouth in particular incredible? I mean, just from looks. I can figure on other things, but like, is that something that can be determined by sight? And there's also this student here, and she may not look familiar, but it's likely you'll recognize her voice because this is Nancy Cartwright, otherwise known as Bart Simpson. Trouble begins when one of the girls shows up face down in the lake, dead, but have no fear because a member of the California Highway Patrol is on the case. They want to say that it's an accident, but he thinks that something else is up. And Chris is here, and I guess he's not a fireman anymore. Seems like he's right though, since everyone appears to have a motive because literally everyone in the school seems to hate each other. And then there's another death. What then unfolds is sort of a slasher flick formula, just without the slasher scenes, so I guess more of a murder mystery, or something right in between. And like I said, this one aired on television, on ABC, and it's obvious that they were looking to cash in on the slasher craze of the time. I mean, take a look at that poster, but presented in a TV primetime fashion. It was directed by William Wyard, and we've already encountered him a couple of times already, all for TV movies. He directed The Girl, The Gold Watch, and Everything, which was covered back on the Sci-Fi Project in '80, and he also did the haunted house flick, This House Possessed, from 1981. And what's interesting is that for a while, this was considered a bit of a holy grail for slasher buffs, since it was never given a proper VHS or DVD release. And it wasn't something that was reran too frequently, so the only way to see it was on wonky bootlegs. And I'm giving this a 2.5. It's enjoyable enough for the most part, and I like the character stuff, but it's a watered down version of things that we've seen already. Its significance is a 2, because again, this is one that isn't really spoken about unless you're discussing obscure slasher flicks, but it does have enough recognizable names to give it a little extra kick. Should you watch it? Maybe? I mean, it might be a nice starter slasher for someone you know that's afraid of the goriness of some of them. We're getting away from the small screen, but we're going to take a short detour up into Canada. And up on March 18th, there's the release of American Nightmare. It begins with the future Stephanie Holden sans her red swimsuit in Alexander Paul's second work in her career, and her first feature film, just a little bit before her breakout role later on in the year, which we'll talk about in a few episodes. In what appears to be a theme with this block, she's a prostitute and is murdered by her John, and her brother comes looking for her and finds out that she was a working girl and also a stripper. He goes to his dad, who he hasn't seen in a while, and he's the CEO of a big business and refuses to help track Isabel down. Pretty soon, someone kills one of Isabel's co-workers and makes it look like a suicide, so it's clear that there's something else afoot here. Because of the deaths, a police detective, Daryl Revalk, is on the hand, and Eric teams up with another of Isabel's friends named Louise to see if he can solve the mystery. And I guess I should point out that there are several rather lengthy strip club dance sequences, and it's not like this scene is set in a strip club and there's girls dancing here. The dances are the scenes, like it was the whole purpose of making the film. The murders continue as the plot thickens, and it turns out that everything involves a set of mysterious videotapes and blackmail. And like I said, this one is from Canada, which is funny for a film called American Nightmare, especially since it was filmed in Toronto, and it was done on a low budget, just $200K. Paul Lynch, director of Prom Night, and also a Canadian, was interested in making this film and doing this script, but he was tied up with other projects and probably couldn't find a way to write in a whole disco dancing sequence that goes on for too long, but he did end up executive producing it. It took a while to get out there since it was filmed in late 80 and early 81 and took until 83 for it to be completed and distributed. Got a limited run in Canada and then played on US TV a little later on in the year, and didn't really make a big splash, but it did get some favorable write-ups. And this one's weird. It's another 2 from me. I like that it's a political thriller wrapped up in a sleazy slasher shell, but it all feels a bit cheap, and it's not all that interesting. Its HCS is just a 1 though, since it's unheard of, unspoken of, and didn't feature anyone in the field. Should you watch it? You can probably sleep through this nightmare. We're staying out of US theaters, and damn, are we ever getting back there? But this one came out in Spain first on March 23rd, and it's Revenge in the House of Usher. Not the singer Usher though, someone else entirely. There's this guy with a wonky eye, and he's working with Dr. Usher on some sort of an experiment involving a young woman, and Usher is Howard Vernon, who we previously saw on the project back in 1981 in both Zombie Lake and The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Miss Osborne. Not the singer Osborne though, someone else entirely. His experiments are attempting to restore his daughter to life, and one of his former students shows up out of the blue. He's got a whole basement full of women, and when Harker discovers them, a group of young women chained up in the basement, his reaction?
I don't understand. Why did he do that?
Dude, what does it matter? What answer here would make sense? Just like, let him out. And when Usher starts to relate his tragic backstory, the film jumps back to black and white footage, and actor Howard Vernon seems quite a bit younger. And that's because this is recycled footage from the 1962 film The Awful Dr. Orloff, which also starred Vernon. It's just redubbed here, but here's the thing. This footage wasn't originally in the movie, and this represents the third version of this film. You see, this is another one from Jesus Franco, and get ready for this list because he's already been on the project with White Cannibal Queen, Devil Hunter, Bloody Moon, Sex is Crazy on the Sci-Fi Project, Oasis of the Zombies, and Mansion of the Living Dead. This was meant to be a take on the Poe tale, The Fall of the House of Usher, and Franco's original cut of the film was only shown one time at a festival premiere on that March 23rd date. But it was mocked and booed by the audience all throughout, and because of that, he couldn't find anyone to release it. So, he decided to alter the film, and this original take is considered lost. The second version featured 3 new scenes that had Vernon killing 3 new victims and changed the overall story. And in this take, Usher is turned into a supernatural creature that feeds on human blood. And it was then titled The Crimes of Usher and got a small release in Spain in 1986, 3 years later. This version, the third one, is the one that's most commonly found and most seen, since it was the only one to get a commercial release, and it was changed to Revenge in the House of Usher. It cuts out those 3 scenes that were shot for the second version, adds a number of new scenes that introduce the dead daughter plotline, and add the Orloff footage to flesh things out. In any version, it didn't get a lot of play and didn't become really all that well known, and by this point, barely resembled the Poe story that it claimed to be based on. And what a snoozer. It's a 1.5 from me, and I'm getting to the point where if I see Franco's name pop up, and I just get a pillow ready. Its significance is just a 1 since it's pretty unknown, even for the director's filmography, and the only thing of note is the story of the 3 different versions. Should you watch it? No, there's better Poe adaptations on the horizon.
Melissa. Oh.
And we're still not back in the States because 1 day later, on March 24th, in the Netherlands, The Fourth Man was released. The guy who killed Dr. Kimball's wife is here, and he's an alcoholic and prone to outbursts. He's also prone to flights of fancy, like seeing a picture of a hotel and imagining or remembering a surreal encounter there. But he's also a successful novelist, and while giving a lecture, he encounters the Eve of Destruction, and she tells him that they've booked a room, but it's that same hotel that he had a nightmare about. And instead of going there, he instead goes home with Christine, and they have sex. But afterwards, he has a dream that she castrates him with a massive pair of scissors. She says that her husband has died, and the two start up a relationship of sorts, but things start to get weird when he finds a photo of a man he was earlier infatuated with on the train. And then there's other things that keep pointing back to that ride, and he sticks around, but it's unclear if he's interested in her or the man in that photograph. He keeps having odd visions, taking a religious form, and always including the mysterious Herman. But then it turns out that Christine wasn't just married once, but had been married 3 times before. And when she shows back up with Herman in tow, the plot thickens. And what's even going on anyway? And this little mind bender is by Paul Verhoeven, director of RoboCop, Total Recall, and Showgirls. And this was the movie that sort of crossed him over. Before this, he was an established Dutch director, and quite a bit of his work was dismissed by critics over there who accused him of making shallow, vapid films. Because of that, he intentionally made this one loaded with religious iconography and symbolism, tried to make something that would please them. And it worked. The film was praised there and became a hit in the Netherlands, and Verhoeven was a bit bummed out that he felt like he was forcing all of that more artistic stuff and it was all overdone. But he has changed his mind over time. But the real story was how it did when it was released in the US, since it was a massively acclaimed film and would become the highest grossing Dutch movie ever. And this is a wild one. It's a 4 from me. It's just this really cool character piece, and the imagery pulls you in, and you're never quite sure what's going on, but you're completely on board. Its significance is a 2.5, since it is a major jumpstart to the director coming to do American work, but it's just not a widely seen film, and may have had more of an impact overseas than it did here. Should you watch it? Yes, go forth and do it. We're going to jump 1 week to March 31st, but we're still not in the US since this is another international entry from Hong Kong, and it's The Trail. And seriously, listen to this opening theme music. If I see a dog in the snow, I'm panicking. It's actually set back in 1922, and it's in this small village and a rather wicked mob boss that kills his little brother who had leprosy. Because they want to cover that all up, he hires a group of smugglers who pose as Taoist priests to get rid of the body for him. Their gig is that they all disguise themselves as hopping vampires so that they're left alone, but they're actually transporting opium. And yep, they're just going to use that thing music the whole way through, aren't they? Trouble kicks in when they wind up in some quicksand and lose the body, and then immediately encounter some thieves and are unable to retrieve it. But then that quicksand starts to bubble. Something comes up out of it, and I swear that this guy is Asian Ted Raimi. But something seems to be killing off members of the group and people around the village, and something that makes duck noises?
Quack. Quack. Quack.
It's then up to our bumbling group of smugglers to find the vampire on the loose in this big hidden temple, all to the tune of that awesome and very much stolen Morricone score. This one marks the first entry on the project for an HK legend, and sort of an American one as well, since this was an early work from Ronnie Yu. This guy became a standard of Hong Kong horror before making the jump to the States with Bride of Chucky and Freddy vs. Jason. His career is kind of weird because he did Bride, and that was a hit, and FVJ, which was a big moneymaker, and he then did the more action-oriented Fearless, and that did great too. But then he was attached to Snakes on a Plane, but was replaced and only did an episode of Masters of Horror, and then took a 5-year break before making an action film in China, and then nothing else. So I wonder what happened with him as a director. And this one's fun, but not as much fun as some of the other ones from China in this same time period. I give it a 3. And it was just weird hearing that music all throughout, although I have to admit, kind of fits it. Its significance is just a 1 since it's a virtually unknown one over here, and yes, it was an early work for you, but it wasn't one that got him a lot of recognition. Should you watch it? Sure, this trail's worth a hike. We're finally back in the US now and talking about a great little flick that debuted here on April 22nd, and this is The Deadly Spawn, also called The Aliens Deadly Spawn, and eventually The Return of the Aliens Deadly Spawn. It begins with a comet landing out in the woods and something unseen killing a couple of campers. In silhouette, we see a creature with a rather large mouth growing, and then meet a couple that live nearby. Sam thinks the basement is flooded, and he's kind of right, but the bigger problem is the man-eating creature that's down there that paints the walls with him. And when his wife goes down there, she gets it too. And our creature is revealed. And look at this thing. This is amazing. I'm assuming the soundproofing on that basement is just awesome because the entire rest of the family, including a visiting aunt and uncle, are just upstairs. One of them is Pete, who invites his friends over to study, but let's not forget little Charles, who has a penchant for special effects and monster movies. He finds out about the thing downstairs and discovers that it has little worm babies, but luckily for him, the big guy's taking a post-eating the electrician nap. He gets stuck there and has to watch them eat his mom's face, which I'm sure isn't damaging at all, and then discovers that the creatures can't see, come after sound. Meanwhile, Pete and his pals find a little one and dissect it, and it doesn't take long before a whole bunch of them are on the attack and biting the old ladies there for tea, and the mega monster heads upstairs, leading to a tense face-off. And this was a first and only film from Douglas McKeown, and it was done on an insanely low budget of $25,000, which is just nuts to think about when you see how fantastic that monster is. The producer on the film was Ted Boas, who had helped get a couple of other low-budget features off the ground, including Night Beast, and he sketched out a monster that was basically just a man in a suit with a mask on, but then they hired an effects guy named John Dodds who wanted to do something more grand and created this glorious monstrosity you see before you. And the only problem was that it didn't fit into the house, so they actually had to chop it up and reassemble it inside. It was shot under the title The Deadly Spawn, but when they found a distributor, they wanted to cash in on all the talk that was going on around them making a sequel to Alien, so they retitled it either The Return of the Alien's Deadly Spawn or Return of the Alien, The Deadly Spawn. There was also sort of a sequel in 1990 called Metamorphosis, The Alien Factor, which was also titled The Deadly Spawn 2 in some places. Oh, one other thing. Something weird happens in this movie with a surprising death. The movie gives you a set of teen characters and follows them a while, and then out of the blue, another person shows up and one of those teens is shockingly killed off, and the new character then just sort of becomes one of the leads. Turns out that the actress playing that character got another job and couldn't be in the film anymore. So they had to write her out and replace her with a new character, which is kind of weird, but plays well in the movie since you are not expecting it. And oh boy do I love this. It's a 4 from me. I can't believe that this was $25K and has actual characters, genuine suspense, and a ton of fun. And that final shot is a killer. Its horror cultural significance is a 3 since it is a bit more known and was a regular on video store shelves, but it's never been a household name and didn't make the impact that it possibly could have. Should you watch it? Without a doubt. This is great stuff, especially for fans of practical creature effects. We're going to slip into the world of the subversive here as we check out one that was released sometime in April, and it's Geek Maggot Bingo, or The Freak from Suckweasel Mountain. It has an introduction by the Alamer himself, Zachary, doing the thing that he does, which is being awesome. We then meet the devious Dr. Frankenberry, as he's kicked out of his job for conducting illegal experiments, which is apparently an adorable kitty, which he says that was brought back from the dead. And he's looking for an assistant, eventually finding Geeko. His lab is delightfully low rent, and they need fresh bodies. And when asked if he knows anything about prostitutes, instead of going out and getting prostitute bodies, Geeko dons a disguise to lure in victims. He gets body parts, and Frankenberry's daughter Buffy is dating Flavian here, and he's played by a guy whose name is Gumby Spangler, which I'm going to assume is a pseudonym, but who knows, really? It turns out that Flavian is actually a vampire that gets his teeth on Buffy and serves Scumbelina, and in order to combat them and avenge his daughter, they call on a cowboy named the Rawhide Kid, and he's Richard Hell, legendary punk rocker of television, and Richard Hell and the Voidoids. It then turns into a challenge between the vampires and Frankenberry as the Doc eventually succeeds in creating the Formaldehyde Man. And here's what you're likely asking. What the hell is this? And this was a part of the transgressive cinema wave that was happening at the time and was an early film by renowned indie filmmaker Nick Zed. And I wasn't aware until I started the research on this one, but he just passed away back in 2022. Zed was notorious in the 80s and 90s for a series of low-budget, envelope-pushing films and books like Orgasm and War is Menstrual Envy. He was a part of the whole movement at the time that included the likes of Richard Kern and Lydia Lunch, and this was a fairly notorious one because at a screening for the film, Zed walked out and shot a couple of audience members and killed them before the movie started. It was just a stunt though, and the gun was a cap gun, and the victims simply popped bags of blood on themselves. And I'm going with a 3 here because the ending of this one is awesome and has some fun effects going on. But I'll admit that most of Zed's stuff was pretty short, and I kind of wish this one was as well because it does go on a little bit too long. Its significance is a 2, but it's really not known in the horror world, but it had a pretty solid impact on the punk cinema scene. Should you watch it? I'd say yes. It's a fun sort of spoof and different angle on Frankenstein.
No! This labyrinth of pain and fear that we call life is but a prelude to the cosmic symphony of oblivion.
The final film on this block debuted in both the US and Canada on April 29th, and prepare for some gothiness with The Hunger. If you're a fan of awesome music, the intro is basically a music video for Bauhaus's Bela Lugosi is Dead, and they're playing in a club. And some of the audience in attendance are a belle du jour and a thin white duke. They bring a couple home with them, and one of them is Anne Magnuson, and I guess most people know her from like a million best friend roles in various comedies, and I don't know, maybe making Mr. Right, but I always knew her from that weirdo band Bongwater. The couple seduce and then kill the young punks, and then Louise is here, sans Thelma. John and Miriam are both vampires and become interested in the studies of Dr. Roberts, who is researching rapid aging in monkeys. Turns out that John has been rapidly aging and losing his immortality, and as he keeps getting older and older, he starts to get more and more desperate. He even begs Miriam to kill him, but here's the rub: they can't die and are just in this eternal half-life state. She places him in a coffin to just be there forever, which kinda sucks, but I don't know. This is a universe in which David Bowie will always be alive, no matter what, so in my eyes, it's a hell of a lot better than ours. Substitute Brad Majors is on hand, and Cher's dad is here as well, and when Sarah comes to Miriam's house to try to find out more about John, they start an affair of their own that, of course, leads to some vamp biting. And this was an early film from Tony Scott and was his first feature film. And shortly after this would go on to much bigger things outside of the horror realm with Top Gun and Beverly Hills Cop 2. He was actually the younger brother of Ridley Scott. He died back in 2012 in a really odd sort of circumstances where he jumped off of a bridge, likely due to a long cancer battle. This story was adapted from a novel that was by Whitley Strieber, the man who also wrote Woofin and the alien story Communion. The makeup effects in the film were by the legendary Dick Smith, and those were some of the most attention-getting aspects when it was released, and it was nominated for a couple of Saturn Awards, with one being for Best Makeup. It actually got pretty negative reviews at the time, with most calling it style over substance and saying that it was empty. And it did alright, earning around $10 million at the box office, but was far from a hit. One thing I'll discuss here, and I'll try to avoid spoilers, but the studio demanded a minor reshoot and an additional scene placed at the end. They wanted to be able to set up a sequel, have it be a little bit more open-ended, I guess ambiguous, although Sarandon regrets doing the scene, saying that it contradicts the point of the movie and its own internal continuity. Oh, and also look for a Blink and You'll Miss Him cameo from a very early in his career Willem Dafoe as second phone booth youth. And this was almost a 3.5, but I'm going to bump it to a 4. I have to admit that I agree with the whole style over substance complaint here, but the style is just so good. And it really does create this whole world, and I get sucked into it. Its significance is a 3.5 since it's pretty well known, and even though it wasn't a smash hit, it's developed this big cult following, particularly in the goth world. Should you watch it? Definitely satisfy your hunger. So there you have it, the second volume of movies from 1983, and my favorite one of this roster, gonna make some people mad, but it's gonna be Deadly Spawn. Man, I love that movie. It's just so much fun, and that monster is so cool. I could look at that thing so much. I love The Hunger. Hunger's a great flick. But ultimately, I'd rather watch Deadly Spawn. It's just silly. Let me know which of these is your favorite down below. Let me know which of these you've seen, which you haven't seen, which you'd now like to see. Tell me that all down below in the comments. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you enjoy the channel, subscribe to it. And also, if you think about it, go to my Patreon page, patreon.com/movietimelines, where you can help support this channel like these guys do. And thank you, and we'll come back because 1983 is on full effect right now. We're kicking straight into it right here on the 80s Project.